to, if you...
Okay, hi again. Are people joining this new video? For some reason, it didn't share my screen before, just the browser window. So is it working now? Let's see. Oh, yes. Okay, here I can see right now that it's working. We don't need this. Hide. All right. Whoops. What did I do? Okay. Here. All right, let's start with today's presentation. People are joining? Yes, very good. All right, so today we're going to talk about orthography and phonology, which are fancy ways to talk about sound systems and writing systems. So the objectives today, what are we going to cover today? I want to talk about the practical aspects of phonology for language documentation. Like I said before, I myself am not a professional phonologist. I do some work in phonology, but it's not my primary area. But I want to teach you how you use phonology to do basic language documentation. So if you expect this to be a basic introduction to theoretical phonology, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disappoint you. If you want to learn more about that, contact the linguistics professor or just message us on our page. We can discuss. I'll be happy to talk about that, but this won't be covered here in today's presentation. So what I want you to understand, though, is the concept of a language-specific sound system, and how then does a writing system, how maybe should a writing system represent that sound system? The relevance of this is that when we document languages, we want to have a comprehensive documentation of it, right? We want to understand all the major parts of the linguistic system, and that includes the phonology, obviously. So we want to understand that. We want to create a wholesome documentation of a language's system. And then also, of course, it's important to be able to know how to write the language if you're going to use it for language teaching, language revitalization, in case your language is endangered. All right, so first thing to understand is that sounds are not the same as letters. Oftentimes, when people talk about the sound system of a language, they make the mistake of talking about letters. So I wanted to just make you understand how they're different. So English, for example, has in the alphabet that English uses, there are 26 letters, right? Now, does English have 26 sounds? Let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Let's see what you guys. Okay. So one sound may correspond to 2 or more letters. There might be some sounds that can be represented in different ways. In English, let's talk about English first. I know I could use some of your languages that you speak, maybe some bigger languages like Russian or Spanish that maybe you speak, but I know that everyone speaks English because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this presentation. So let's start with English, okay? So what sounds can you think of that are represented in different ways? I'm just gonna wait here a little bit because I know there's a lag, so feel free to message here to this video. I'm gonna wait for your answers, but like I said, it's lagging, so I'm gonna have to wait for a while. So I'll let you guys think about that. Can you write down any combinations of letters or maybe any single letters that represent the same sound? Can you think of any? And at the same time, also, sometimes one letter can represent different sounds depending on the context. Can you think of any examples for that? I hope people are responding. I'm still waiting. Good morning, Kate. Good morning, Danny. I just see that you joined. Okay. All right, C, yeah, very good. Thank you, Anna. So C can be K or S, that's right. Very good, Kate, you got that too. Yes, so a lot of you think of the letter C. Now, if you look at the word phonology, okay, So that it starts with PH, right? But it represents the sound F. So obviously F and PH are two different ways to represent the same letter. If you wrote phonology with an F, it would look funny, but it would represent the same sound. Similarly, the G, right? Same as the C. The G can be a G sound, as in, for example, goose, or in phonology, the G sound represents a G, as when you say the letter, right? So that can be different too. So there's a few, you could say, inconsistencies maybe, or maybe complications when it comes to the writing system of English, because there are some sounds that can be represented in different ways. Now, thinking about a letter, I guess I already mentioned that. So a letter that can correspond to two or more sounds would be G, would be C. These are the answers that you gave me, right? Yes, Guillaume, I see you said thought, the OU, right? You're referring to the OU in the middle of those words, which is it's written as OU in all of those cases, but it's pronounced different ways. So there's thought, though, through, thorough, tough, right? The way you pronounce that OU in that sequence is different. Okay, very good. Let's move on here. So we have a little exercise here. So I want you guys to figure out how many sounds. So this is to train you guys, again, to think about how letters are different from sounds, right? It would be very easy if I asked you how many letters are in those words, right? You just count. But I am asking you how many sounds does each of these words here have? So they're see, stick, mix, and good. Do you wanna guess and just say it out loud to you and think, how many times does your mouth actually move to make a different gesture? Which is a pretty good guess of when you would use a different sound. So see, stick, mix, and good. Any guesses? Are you guys following Leon and Liv? Yeah? Yeah. You got the answers already? Trained linguists, they better know. All right. So, okay, let's see. Edward replied here. 2 sounds for C. That's right. Because you have E, right? Even though you have 3 letters and there's an E and an A in there, you don't say CA or something. You just say C, right? So after this, you open your mouth and you say E, right? But you don't really change your mouth much. It just stays the same, right? But then stick, 4 sounds. What are the 4 sounds? S, as in C, the first one is the same, right? St. So the T is the second one. I, K. I count 3. Oh no, 4. That's right. Sorry, it got me confused. So you got S, T, I, K. 4, right? How many letters? 5. So that's another mismatch there, right? How bad? Okay, mix, only 3 letters, but 4 sounds, right? So you get I, K, S. So the X represents actually 2 sounds, right? The X actually is composed of a K and a S sound, as if you were to write KS, right? It would be pronounced the same way. All right, and then good is 3 sounds. That's right. Edward got it all right. So so good is G, U, D, right? Those are 3 sounds, but we write them with 4 letters. So you see that we need to distinguish sounds from letters. They're not the same thing. Even when we count them, they don't add up to the same number. Okay, so let me introduce to you the concept of the phoneme. So a sound inventory is the complete list of contrastive sounds in a language. Let me see if I missed any slide here. No, that's okay. All right, good. So what we want to figure out to understand the sound system of a language, we want to know the complete list of sounds that are contrastive in that language, that make a difference in meaning. So how can we figure that out? So oftentimes, as a native speaker, you have intuition about which sounds are distinct from each other. So for example, if I were to say, instead of saying good, I say gad, it's like that doesn't sound like good even, that you wouldn't understand that to mean the same thing, right? So the u and the a are two different sounds, right? Same if I say, for example, bat, or if I say pat, I just changed the beginning of those two words, right? Already you see that it changes the meaning. So we know from that the B and the P are two different sounds. So oftentimes you sort of already understand from your native speaker tuition, that which sounds you know, are going to be different from each other. But a very good way to actually pin it down and you know, to have some sort of proof of that, you know, that two sounds are really distinct from each other is using minimal pairs. Now, minimal pairs are pairs of words that contrast in only one sound. Okay, so one minimal pair, for example, would be bat and pat, like I just said before. Another minimal pair would be B and P, right? The same contrast, it's the B versus the P. The whole rest of the word is the same, even though you write it differently, but the sound that follows that is the same, right? So you can have minimal pairs, you can have minimal triplets, like the ones that I wrote down here. So you can have me, B, and P. All of these three words are different in only one sound, in the sound that they start with, right? And in fact, if you look at these three words, you notice that all of these words start with a labial sound. That means that you use your lips to pronounce it. So you go me, B, P, right? So you use your lips, but you use them in different ways to pronounce these different sounds. Similar, we have this minimal pair, or rather minimal triplet. The other one that I wrote down here, do, to, and lu. All of those three words start with a different sound, but they end with the same sound. So these are just different in the way they start. And similarly, also, these different sounds are pronounced with your tongue going behind your teeth, but then doing different things. You use a different, what we call, manner of articulation, of pronunciation, to distinguish these different words. So this is important here, that not only are these random sounds that I'm making, but they actually are real words that mean different things, right? So if you do use a D instead of a T, that can lead to an entirely different meaning, right? Same with L, right? So lu is a word in English. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with that word. If you are, leave a comment. So let me go back real quick and see what you guys wrote here. Could ST be considered one sound? Well, yes, actually, in some languages, it's not. Languages can differ in what exactly counts as one phoneme, as one sound, as opposed to another. There's a lot of congruence, there's a lot of agreement between the languages of what counts as one sound as opposed to a combination of two sounds. But there's some variation across languages. ST, I don't know a single language that would consider that as one sound, but it's conceivable. Certainly not in English. So when you say stick, it's the onset there, the first two consonants starting that word are two. It's not just one. So thank you for that question. Considered TS is often considered one phoneme. Yes. So in German, for example, you write the t sound. You write that with one letter, and usually, if you ask German native speakers, possibly they're influenced by the writing system. But I think if you look at the syllable structure of German, you will see that t acts as it behaves like just other consonants. Yeah. So that's there are more complex, more complicated ways to figure out which sounds are really contrastive and which are a combination of sounds as opposed to single sounds. But we won't go into too much detail here. And like I said, we can't talk about all the languages right now. So one thing I want to mention here is that, of course, you probably are familiar that sound inventories, so the phonemes of a language, consist of vowels and consonants. What's the difference between them? Usually, you just think in terms of letters, you would say, well, A, E, I, O, U, those are vowels, right? So those letters are vowels, and then the rest of them are consonants, right? But in terms, we don't want to talk in terms of letters, but we want to talk in terms of sounds, right? A lot of languages aren't even written. A lot of languages have only started to be written, very recently, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years ago, probably the vast majority of the world's languages. And a lot of them still aren't written to this day, but they're still languages, and we can talk about the sounds of languages. So vowels are sounds where the air flows freely through your vocal tract, from your lungs out of your mouth. When you pronounce consonants, though, there's a blockage or restriction of the airflow somewhere. Sometimes it's completely obstructed, like when you say a T, and you notice that when you try to say a long T, try and say a long T, there's no sound until you release it, right? Because there's no passage of air. As opposed to an S, you can say S for a long time or Z for a long time because air still keeps flowing. But there's a major obstruction there, right? If I say Z, like you hardly see where the air even comes through. So these are consonants. All right, so let's move on here. So, we just talked about the sounds of English, right? Maybe I didn't really answer the question that I posed before, which is how many sounds does English have, right? So it's more than 26 because there are combinations of letters. I feel like I'm missing a slide here. I don't know where it went. Anyway, so there are combinations of letters that represent one sound. So, for example, in English, you can when you write ch, you pronounce it as a ch, right? So that's another example of a so-called digraph that you use two letters to represent one sound. So ch is a sound in English. Where was I going with that? So oh yes, so that's a digraph. So it's one more sound of English, but it wouldn't be counted if you just count letters, right? You count 26. So there are actually, if you count all those digraphs separately and then distract all the other ones, where there are multiple ways of to write one sound with different letters, you get to the final count of most people agree that there are 24 consonants in English, 24 consonant sounds. And then people disagree on vowels, but oftentimes people say that there are 12 monophthongs in English. Those are vowels where your mouth pretty much doesn't move while you're saying them. And then there are another maybe 8 diphthongs where your mouth moves while you say them. So a monophthong would be something like I or U or something like that, like in good, because your mouth doesn't really move much while you make the vowel gesture. But if you say something like, for example, house, then the ow in there is considered as one vowel, but a vowel that changes. Some people would say, it's actually a combination of two vowels when you have an ow, depending on the language. So vowels are complicated, have a complicated story there. It's not as easy to count vowels often as it is to count consonants. But anyway, the point here is that English has more than just 26 sounds. So of course, then there are other languages that have other sounds still, right? We just talked about English. So you make certain distinctions in English that don't really, as an English speaker, you don't consider the sounds to be different. But completely objectively speaking, as an outsider, if you listen to them, if you measure it really closely, you will notice that they're actually different sounds. So when you say call versus lack, the L in those two words are different. So L for lack, but O, what we call a velarized L in call. So if you look at Albanian, for example, these words can contrast, and we see with the minimal pair there. So there's mal, which means mountain, but there's mal or mal, which means goods. So those two words have different meanings, and they're only distinguished by that last sound. Okay. Now in English, the P. Let's look at the P and those two words there next is pit and spit. So one of those sounds is pronounced p, the first one in pit, and the second one is p, spit. All right. Now, as an English speaker, you say, oh, those are just P's. You know, who cares? It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't for English, but it does, for example, for Thai. Because if you say pa or if you say pa, those mean two different things. Pa means mouth, but when you say pa, it means to cut something open. Now you might be thinking, well, those is just like B and P in English, right? Well, there's a third one. There's ba, and ba means shoulder. So there's ba, 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 pa. They all mean different things. So in Thai, they distinguish these different sounds. Okay, English doesn't. Then in English, usually probably most of you will pronounce the word of the color red as such, but there are some dialects, especially in Northern England. I hear Welsh people speak like that. They roll their R's, so they will say something like red, right? Red or red. Now, if you just think, maybe for some of you who haven't really been exposed to that, you think, oh, that's a funny pronunciation of it, but it doesn't change the meaning of the word, right? So you can say red, red, same thing. In Itaral, which is a native indigenous language of Taiwan that I work on, those are two different sounds. If you say r or r, it makes a difference. So for example, if you say the word for I, you say rori. So the first one is a r, the second one is a r. You cannot switch the two. It wouldn't mean the same thing. People would think you pronounced the word just wrongly, right? And then the opposite thing where we have a r first and then a r afterwards is the word for butterfly in that language, which is rapiri. So there again, you see that there are two different R sounds. Okay, so these are some sounds that may be made in English, but they don't really make a difference, right? They're not distinct phonemes. They're different sounds of English, but they're not separate phonemes. But in those other languages, those same sounds are distinctive. That's important to understand. And then there are some sounds which people don't use in English at all, but they are in other languages. Like, for example, in Welsh, there's a ch sound that is spelled like this, ch, a hl sound, which is written with a double L. There's a sound, which is basically like a rolled R, but no voicing. So it's not a r, but it's a. Then there's and then those two other letters there, the Y and the W, I put them on there because they're actually vowels in Welsh, okay? They're pronounced and u. So you see that so it would be wrong to just say A, E, I, O, U are the vowels, and then the rest of the letters in that alphabet that English uses are consonants, right? Because, you know, in other languages, the same letters might be used for vowels, right? So it depends on the language. Then in Tlingit, a language of on the Canada, Alaska border, there's other sounds still. There's and then there's those are all sounds that they make in that language, and they're distinctive from each other. Okay, in English you have nothing like that. And then of course you're familiar with Mandarin probably, that distinguishes tones. So if you say in English, if you say call, or if you say call, or if you say call, they all mean the same thing. It just refers to the same thing, maybe a little bit slightly different maybe intention when you say it. But in Mandarin, if you say ma, 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 they all mean different things. The first one means mother. The second one means hemp, as the thing that you use to make ropes with. Ma means a horse, and ma means to scold someone. So they all mean completely different things. It's not just your attitude or something that has changed when you say those. So so like I said, English does not have the entire palette of sounds. You're probably familiar with that if you speak other languages. So depending on the language, the same sound is written in different ways. We just saw, well, in English, there's a digraph SH, which is pronounced sh, right? The same sound, sh, is spelled in German with SCH, in Italian with SC, in Portuguese with an X, in Czech with that, in Turkish with that. You see, across languages, there's multiple ways to represent the same sound. And then there are also letters that are used in different languages to represent different sounds. So like I said before, I just gave you the example of ch in English, which is written as ch, right? Same in Spanish, that letter combination is pronounced ch, but in French, this letter combination is pronounced sh. Same as the other ones, the letter combinations that I just showed you above for that same sound, sh. And then Italian, ch is pronounced as k. And then in German and in Welsh, I just told you before, the letter combination ch is pronounced as ch. How confusing, right? Why can't people just agree and use the same system to write sounds, right? So this is the idea that some people had. It was a group of language teachers, actually, language teachers of English and French. And that was in 1886 that they got together in Paris. They had a little conference, a little workshop, and they thought, you know what, it would be really useful if we could just represent sounds the same way in different languages, because this is confusing. It's difficult for people to learn different languages, right? So they came up with that, what is called IPA. So it stands for International Phonetic Alphabet, not to be confused with Indian Pale Ale. So when linguists, when linguists talk about IPA, it refers to this system, to this really useful tool, which is a consistent way to represent the sounds of language. And I spelled language with a capital L here because it refers to human language, the languages of the world. Okay, it's a very ambitious project because it attempts to include all the sounds that people make in the world's languages. So the whole idea behind that is, as I just mentioned, to have a one-to-one correspondence between sounds and symbols, so that you can you can write any language. You might never have learned that language or even heard that that language exists, but if you write down words in that language in IPA, you can pronounce it. Isn't that a very useful tool? Linguists are certainly very excited about it. So let me see what you guys wrote here so I don't fall behind. Okay, ST. Yes, thank you for your comments. Mishtek is a tonal language as well. That's right. There's a lot. In fact, being familiar with European languages only, you might think that tone is a weird thing, only used in some languages in Asia. A lot of people think that, but actually, a lot of languages in the world, I think probably almost half of the world's languages have tone. It's very common. It's very common in Africa, for example. It's very common in Northern America. It's obviously very common in Asia. So tone is not a weird thing. It's an integral part of language that needs to be documented as well. If you try to document Cantonese without writing its tones, good luck. All right. All right, let's see. I'll just reply to some of your comments right here because I gotta move on with the presentation, but I'll come back to them later on. All right. Hooray, IPA. Thank you, Anna, for that. All right. So let's move on here. So this is a chart of IPA symbols that people use nowadays. So sometimes people add a new one. They might linguists encounter some language in a remote area of the world, and they see that those sounds contrast with others, so they add them to this list here, right? But these are basically the consonants that people use in the world's languages, okay? And the way it is organized is that we have, if you go from left to right, you see different points of articulation. So the first one will be with your lips, like when I pronounced the words me, be, p before. They're all pronounced with your lips coming together, right? And then as you move further to the right, the sounds move further in your back. The gesture, the articulation that you make will move further back into your mouth. So for example, you notice that there's an N there at the top row. So the N, you pronounce putting your tip of your tongue either to your teeth or just above your teeth, maybe where there's a slight ridge. If you want to try that, go move with your tongue from your teeth a little bit up, and you see that there's a little bump there. A lot of people, when they pronounce N's, your tongue goes there. For others, it depends on the language. Some languages really like to put their tongues under teeth, and others put the tongue higher up. There's some languages that actually distinguish these two sounds. They have an n and an n, but it's not very common. Then you move further back in your mouth to pronounce nasal sounds like nya or ng or ng. And so some of the sounds that you can see here, if you look at the uvular column, those are some of the sounds that I pronounced for tlingit before, which are qa. And then there's a ha sound, the pharyngeal, as you find it in Arabic, for example, is really far back in your mouth. So this chart is organized from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth. And then going down the rows, you have different types of articulation. I can talk about that some more if you want, if you're curious about it, about the anatomy of human speech, but I won't right now. So leave a comment if you want to learn more about that. These are the consonants, right? And if we move further down, we see here on the next slide the chart of vowels. These are the contrastive vowels, I guess, in the world's languages. Now with vowels, as I said before, they're oftentimes a little bit more complicated because when there's free airflow, it's really, I mean, with consonants too, it's really a spectrum of where you put your mouth, where you put your tongue when you pronounce different things, but even more so with vowels, right? If you say, I want to just explain the organization of this chart as well. So from the left to the right shows if you're, again, what your tongue does. So if you pronounce the E, your tongue is in front position as opposed to when you pronounce U, where your tongue is in a very back position. But in both cases, your tongue is high. So you see that they're in the top row of this chart. If you move further down, you pronounce A and O. They're the same with respect to frontness or backness as E and U, but the tongue goes lower. So moving from U to O, your tongue just drops. And then you can go on from there. So this chart basically represents what your tongue does in terms of going up and to the front. All right. There's you can go online if you're curious and want to know how to pronounce the different consonants or these vowels. I think there's a link here. Yes. So you see on this slide here, there's ipachart.com. You can actually listen to them. But for now, let's try and look at those words before that I asked you before to count the sounds, right? So we had see, stick, mix, and good. If we write them in IPA, we see that now we have one letter per sound. So in IPA, counting letters and counting sounds is the same thing because that's how the IPA is structured, right? So C, 2 sounds, S, E, right? 2 letters. Stick, 4 sound, 4 letters in IPA. Not in English common spelling, like in the standard spelling, but in IPA, and so on and so forth. Okay, let me check just real quick what you guys wrote here. Yes, that's right. Thank you, Jonathan, for mentioning pitch accent, which is also a common thing that languages do. Norwegian and Swedish have a system like that. Japanese as well. It's a little bit similar to a tone language, a reduced tone system with just two pitches, low and high. But then there's some restrictions. You cannot really combine lows and highs as you can in some African languages, for example. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Danish is very interesting indeed if you compare that to Norwegian and Swedish. And then yes, like I said before, a lot of languages in Northern America, like for example, Mohawk, have tone as well, as do a lot of Dene languages. For example, Navajo. I saw that there is 1 or 2 people in this group. I'm not sure if they're watching right now. Let us know if you are, who speak Navajo. And that language too has contrastive tones. So like I said, it's not so uncommon in the languages of the world. It's just uncommon in Europe. Okay. So knowing this, having talked about the IPA and about the sounds of the world's languages, right? The question arises: should you use IPA to write your language? Well, of course, linguists will say yes, you should, because we like that, and it's very consistent and transparent. But really, you only need to use that for linguistic publications, right? It's certainly you don't want to go about writing writing your language in IPA all the time, because it's difficult to type. There's a lot of special symbols. You know, like even linguists won't write, except for Anna. Even linguists won't write English with IPA, right? Other people wouldn't understand. You gotta make yourself understood as well, right? So I want to talk a little bit about orthography right now. So orthography refers to the writing system specific to a language. Why is it important to have an orthography? I wanna ask you guys that question. Why do you think languages even need to be written? What are the advantages of writing down a language? Some languages, most languages, right, for the longest period of time, they haven't been written at all. They were just spoken, and they survived until this day. So why do we need written language? What are the advantages, right? Do you wanna think about that, and then write some comments down below? So in the meantime, though, I want to move on here, and I want to discuss with you what it means for an orthography. What makes a good orthography? Okay. Honestly, English is a really bad orthography because it has such a bad correspondence between letters and sounds, right? Like I said before, there's so many letter combinations that represent one sound, and then there are different letters that represent the same sound, so that's very confusing, right? Some languages are more consistent, right? For example, Spanish is pretty straightforward. It's not perfect, but it's better. Finnish is really good. A lot of languages that were that devised their writing systems later on, more recently, tend to have a more transparent system. Because the problem with English is that the writing system was conventionalized a long time ago, and then as time passed, English pronunciation changed, but the writing system didn't. So the writing system still represents what English used to be pronounced like a long time ago. Okay, so but if you think about what makes an orthography good, is it better be consistent and predictable, so that if you want to represent a sound in writing, you better do it the same way all the time. And then if you see a letter, you know how it's going to be pronounced. You don't need to know the word already to know how it's pronounced. Okay. Then it's important that a writing system distinguishes all the phonemes, all the distinctive sounds of a language, right? If it doesn't, and you want to learn a new word, you see how it's spelled, but it misses some of the information, like for example, the stress, pitch, accent, or misses the tone, which are some common things that some orthographies lack. It's going to be really difficult for someone to learn that language, right? Because you're gonna need it to be pronounced by someone else instead of just reading it and understand how it's going to be pronounced. So an example is in Tagalog, for example, and in Philippine languages, it really makes a difference whether you pronounce the vowel long or short, but it's usually not represented in writing. Now that's okay for just for everyday language use if you're already fluent in the language. But if you want to learn the language, you really got to know, because right, if you say magandang gabi, or if you say magandang gabi, those would mean two different things, right? One is good evening, and the other one would mean a nice taro. So you really want to distinguish those two sounds, right? A good orthography also is easy to write on a standard keyboard. You don't want to use a whole lot of special letters that require you to download a separate keyboard or something. Just stick to the easy ones that everyone can type on their phones, can type on their computers. The ideal really is to have one sound corresponding to one letter and vice versa. Okay. Now, your language may already have a written tradition, whether it is official or not. In fact, my own native language, Alemannic, is written. You know, we text each other in Swiss German, but there's no standard orthography. There's no one who says this is the right way to spell it, and then you have to use that when you write it. Of course, when people chat in English, they use different spelling conventions too, or rather, they don't use any conventions at all, but they just write how it's most convenient, right? But still, there is a convention, there is a standard. This is the correct way to spell English, right? A lot of languages don't have that. So when there is already a standard, you know, you should probably use that one. When people write the language, but it's not really standardized, then you should really, you know, pay close attention to that and follow it as close as possible. But also, you have to consider that practical orthographies, and sometimes the same language can be spelled in various different ways. If it's not standardized, probably that's the case. A lot of practical orthographies don't represent the entire phonology accurately. Like I just told you before with the case of Tagalog, right? So really, for documentation and teaching purposes, you may want to enhance the common practice, not try and completely set up your own system, sort of like in competition to the other system that people already use, because you're probably not that popular that you can change everyone's habits, right? But you wanna be aware of what people are doing, follow that as closely as possible, but where it lacks certain distinctions, where it's not entirely complete, you may want to enhance it, maybe by using some accent marks or whatever, just to have a complete documentation and for teaching purposes. Okay, so now for I guess another couple of minutes here, I just want to introduce to you different types of orthographies. Like I said, your language is probably already written in some way or another, and you just follow that tradition. But I still, just as a general overview, I want to introduce you guys to different types of writing down language. And so these three types of orthographies that I want to introduce to you are logographic systems, syllabaries, and alphabets. So let's move through this quickly. Logographic system is Chinese is an example. So the principle of that is one symbol represents one morpheme or one unit of meaning. That could be a word, or it could be an affix. It just generally, so if you look at the examples on the right here, we have that one symbol that looks like a square, and it means mouth. That one symbol represents the meaning mouth. And then the next one is the symbol for mountain, right? You see that some of those sounds actually, some of those symbols actually are sort of similar to what they represent. Like the mouth is the opening, right, in your face. So that's where that square comes from. And the mountain has this sort of like it sort of looks like a mountain a little bit. It used to look even more like a mountain, and then it changed over time. Same thing for child. But then there are other characters that just you know, are not really transparent at all. So for example, the character for love, I can pronounce them in Mandarin. So the word for love is ai, the word for joy is le, and the word for kiss is wen, right? So, but importantly, these characters don't represent the sound. So you can, if you can have those same characters in a different variety of Chinese, for example, in Cantonese or in Hokkien, or even in Japanese, which is not related to Chinese at all. And you use the same characters to represent the same meanings, but the sound may be completely different. In the case of Japanese, not even related. The thing about the logographic system is that it takes a really long time to learn, and you need to know a lot of those characters to be functioning in that language. If you wanna read a typical Chinese newspaper, you need 2,000 to 3,000 symbols. So I guess I skipped that last example there. So just to show to you guys what a sentence would look like, then If you say, I eat rice, then for each of those words, there's going to be one character, right? So you see 3 characters. 我吃饭. All right. Let's move on to the next type of orthography here. I see that you guys are commenting there. I'm just going to finish this presentation here real quick, and then I'll get to your questions, okay? Just bear with me for another couple of minutes. So syllabary is another type of writing system where one symbol represents one syllable. And what is a syllable? Usually, an easy way to think of syllables is when you tap a word. So for example, if you were to say phonology, you will go phonology. So you have 4 syllables, right? It would be weird if you did something like phonology. That just doesn't match, right? So it's sort of like how many beats you have in a word. There are more, scientific ways to think of syllables, but this is an easy, practical way for you to conceive of syllables, okay? So you got to imagine that if we wrote phonology with a syllabary, there would be 4 characters because phonology has 4 syllables, right? Now, this kind of system works best with languages that have fairly simple syllable structures. For example, Japanese, because in Japanese, usually your syllables will consist of a consonant and a vowel, or just a vowel. But there cannot be a consonant at the end. There cannot be 2 consonants at the beginning. So the different types of syllables that you can have are restricted. Therefore, you don't need too many symbols to represent those syllables, right? In the case of Japanese, Liv, Leah, do you guys know how many characters are in the syllabary?
It depends. Hiragana, there's probably about like 50 to 60. I can't remember.
Yeah. So let's say around 50 or something. So the thing is, you would only need 50 to represent the syllables of Japanese. Now, Japanese people, just for the heck of it, they want to use double of that because they use 2 different syllabaries to represent sort of like their own native words as opposed to words that are taken from foreign languages, so-called borrowings, right? So they use the hiragana and the katakana syllabaries. So down here you see some examples of syllables written in katakana, and also you see just below hiragana and katakana, you see how those 2 words are spelled in the 2 systems. So you see they both end in na, but you see that the last character for hiragana is different from the last character in katakana, right? Because those are 2 different systems that they just like to use. All right. Now, last but not least, there's so-called alphabets, which you might have heard before. The principle here is that there is 1 symbol per phoneme, ideally, okay? Like English uses an alphabet, but there are digraphs. You use 2 letters for 1 sound. It's not perfect, but in general, as a rule, you have 1 symbol per phoneme. It's the most commonly used type of writing system across the world. It's fairly, I would say, useful and easy to learn because it doesn't involve you learning a whole lot of characters. One example for this is the Roman alphabet, also called the Latin alphabet, which is the one used by English or Italian, most, probably all European languages, I guess, modified for different languages. Greek alphabet is also an alphabet. It's also the source of the word alphabet because the first 2 letters are alpha and beta, right? So, so that's a different kind of writing system, but it's also an alphabet. Then there's the Cyrillic alphabet, which is used by Russian or Bulgarian people. And so these are some examples of the letters that they use down there. I can't really read that, but that's what it looks like. So now we reached the end of this presentation. Here are a few prompts for you to work on your language, to move on in the documentation of your language. I'm going to read through this, and then I'm going to get back to your questions and try and answer as many of them as possible. So first of all, you should, like I said before, you should be aware of how or if your language is written. It probably is written in some way or another. In some cases, your language won't be written, but probably it is. Is there only one system that people use? Is there a standard way of writing it? Or are there different systems? Do you think that some systems are better than others in that they're more commonly used, or they represent the different sounds of that language in a more consistent way? Do the writing systems, maybe the writing systems that are in use don't really represent all the different sounds of your language, in which case you may want to figure out a way to enhance that writing system to make those distinctions, right? Ideally, you want to end up with a writing system that is easy to learn, okay? Not just a writing system is easy to learn, but you can use it as a tool to learn that language in an easy manner, okay? That's the better way to put it. Then try to find distinctive sounds in your languages. We usually do this exercise when we hold LDTC workshops here in this room, here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. But you guys can just work on it by yourselves in your homes, with your communities, with your families, and then write it down. You may want to share it on Facebook. And if you have questions, you can ask your mentors for help. They'll be glad to help you. Okay, so try and look for some minimal pairs to really pin down those different distinctive sounds. Do you want to try and figure out the corresponding IPA letters for those sounds? Do you know some sounds that have different variants depending on where they are placed in a word? Are you aware of maybe different ways to pronounce really the same phoneme? Those are all questions that would be really useful for you to document, and let us know on Facebook, and let your mentors know how you're doing. Okay, so right now we reached the end of this presentation. I'm going to switch. No, I'm not going to switch screens because this is where you see me on this screen here, but I'm going to look at the other screen. Oh, actually, I guess I can now move back to the other screen, because then I can actually answer. Is that a good idea, or should I keep? Yes. All right, good. All right.
You can see it there, but
I guess,
it's going to make
yeah,
this-
but people can't see me anymore. You want to see my face? Hi.
Yeah,
All right, I guess we can do it like this, right? What do you see?
So it's covering the illusion of the
Oh yeah,
screens
good,
going
good,
into
good.
themselves.
Let's see, it's because of the lag, I actually don't see it showing up here. Oh yeah, good, all right. So this looks good. All right. So let's look at the questions you guys had. Impressive articulations, thank you, Kate. Let me know if you want me to try and pronounce any other sounds. Whoops, sorry, I went back here. I guess, you know what? I want to use your computer after all, because once I type, it'll put my own video to the back, right? Yeah. I want to type on your computer if that's possible. So, yeah. Thank you, Liv. All right. Let's see. Writing is only an imperfect technology to record language. Yes, you can make it more perfect. You know, ideally, as in English, hint, hint, you know, some people might want to update the orthography a little bit to make it more consistent. Usually, a lot of languages update their orthographies, you know, I guess gradually, yeah, because language changes all the time, right? So the orthography should really follow that to represent the language as it is spoken at any given point. Not at like 500 years in the past, like it is for English. It just makes everyone's life more difficult, right? Okay, so let's go back here. Tick, sick, stick. Oh, very good. So Alfia, I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. That looks like that's a minimal triplet, right? Those are minimal pairs, like sick and stick. That's a good point. But actually, if you count the phonemes in sick and stick, you will get to a different count. So I have s, ik, 3, right? And then st, ik, 4, right? So really, you're not comparing. Minimal pairs are words that are exactly the same, except that one of those sounds is different. If one of those words has more sounds than another one, it's not really a minimal pair anymore, right? Okay, so let's see. Let's move down here. Punjabi. Well, sorry, I sort of missed the context here. So you said, yeah, Punjabi. Oh, you replied to Anna. I see. All right, Ati. Yeah, of course. Punjabi. There's some languages that recently developed tone, which is really an interesting phenomenon that I personally am very interested in, because I work with languages, with one language in particular of Southern Alaska. It's called Iyak, and it doesn't have any tones, but it's related to Dene languages. And those languages, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have tone. So it's really interesting to see how tone developed over time. Also, a really interesting thing is that Chinese, Chinese is tonal nowadays. Like I said, ma, all mean different things, right? But we can reconstruct what Chinese would have been like 1,000 years ago, or even a longer time ago. And at that point, Chinese wasn't tonal at all. So it's over time, Chinese became tonal, right? Another language that I worked on is spoken in northern Thailand. It's called Gnabry. It's a language related to, for example, Mon, or the Khmer language, Cambodian, and it's not tonal. But those languages, Vietnamese and Khmer, isn't tonal at all. But a lot of related languages are tonal. So again, that's where you can see the process of what we call tonal genesis, which is the rise of tone in a language. It's a really interesting phenomenon. Very similar thing is going on in Punjabi, as I understand. All right. Let's see. What other questions did you guys have? Let's go back here. Oh, there's a lot I skipped. Alfia, English orthography is the worst. Yeah, I'm glad you said it. I might get into trouble if I say it online. Maybe some people will, I don't know, question my authority as a Swiss person, All right, some orthographies that are being developed right now. Choose letters that you can find on the keyboard or cell phone so that people can use them more readily. Yes, it's true. You can develop your own app, or ask, for example, Apple or some developer to come up with a separate orthography for your language. But a lot of people still have trouble downloading them. They don't know how to do it, especially elderly people. A lot of communities, it's really only elderly people who still speak the languages. So it's an option, yes. It's very useful in some cases, but if you can think of an orthography, if you have the freedom to really develop an orthography without there being too much of a tradition already, you should probably go for the simple letters that everyone already has on their keyboards. Okay, let's see. Are you guys looking at the questions? Do you have any good ones I should probably respond to? What's the difference between a tap and a flap? Well, isn't this a very phonetic question? I told you guys I'm just going to talk about, very basic things here. I think the difference is one in timing that I'm not entirely sure, actually, because usually languages don't distinguish the two. It's not a question of phonology, but it's a question of phonetics. So some people, when they learn Spanish, when English people learn Spanish, for example, they have trouble pronouncing the R sound, the ere, right? So some people, some teachers will tell them, oh, it's just like the sound that you use when you say water, the d in the middle, right? You spell it with a T, but you pronounce it as water, like that, right? It's really close to how people pronounce the ere in Spanish, but it's really not exactly the same. So one of them is, I think if I'm correct, a flap, and the other one is a tap. And if I'm not completely mistaken, I think the Spanish uses the flap and the English in water uses the tap. but I'm not entirely sure. So you might want to use your, I don't know, ask some phonologist, or I can actually look it up and get back to you. Like I said, it's a very specific phonetics question, and it doesn't, I'm not aware that any language would make that distinction. Yes. So I asked the question before, right? Why people would want to write their languages at all, right? What's the use of that? So Guillaume here responded to that and said, nowadays, you know, we live in visual cultures. Visual, for one, I guess that's true. Visual also means, though, that we can use media like this live stream right now on Facebook, where I can just talk to you and you don't need to read anything. I can communicate with you through video. There's YouTube, right? So I actually think that nowadays we're again moving a little bit away from relying on writing as a medium, because it's so easy to use video talk. But it's true that the internet obviously uses a lot of writing too. So really what I wanted you guys, what I expected you guys to answer to that question of why it's important to have a writing system is because oftentimes people have the impression that a language that isn't written is in some way inferior to others. It's just a spoken variety. Some people, you know, in French-speaking territories, I'm not sure if we have anyone joining in from the Caribbean, they would refer to it as a patois or just some dialect of another thing. Not really a proper language, right? Of course, that's not true, but still a lot of people think that way. So, you know, having a writing system for a speech variety, whether that's a dialect or a language, can really add to the prestige of that language. Also, it's really easy to write down. It's very convenient, you know. Like I said, nowadays we have video recording. So if you want to record a story that your grandmother tells, for example, you can record it with your phone. But you know, if there's writing as well, there's another medium you can use to write that down. What other advantages does a language have if they use an orthography as opposed to just being spoken? Yeah. Let me know if you can think of any other reasons, but I think those are probably the most. Sorry? Online presence, yeah. All right. Written language helps in preservation of language. That's true, yeah. So oftentimes when we record something as linguists, we record a language in video or in sound, we also transcribe it. Because right now, you know, it's still more common to share knowledge through writing as opposed to through videos, right? So, you know, people write books, people don't so much publish DVDs or something of a language, right, as a documentation product, right? Okay, what else? Should orthographies reflect phonemes or allophones? Thank you, Kate, for that question. I actually was wondering whether I should mention it during the presentation, but I was rushing to finish. So let me tell you that usually you want to have a letter for a phoneme, and it's not really necessary to distinguish the allophones because allophones are going to be used. So allophones are different ways of pronouncing the same phoneme, right? So as I said in English, for example, the O and the L, as in lack or call, those are allophones of the L sound, right? The L phoneme. Or for example, the P, the different pronunciations of the P, as in spit or pit, right? Those are just allophones of the same phoneme. So in general, you don't need to distinguish different allophones. But in some cases where the allophones are just really different from each other, people still choose to represent them in a different way. So for the people joining from the Philippines, just last semester we had LDTC workshop here, and there was someone joining from the Philippines, from the Visayas, and so she spoke a language called Aclanon. You might have seen it in writing as Aclanon with an L. But they pronounce it as Aclanon because the L sound is actually an allophone of the L. And it never contrasts with the L sound. So the and the are in complementary distribution. That means they never appear in the same context. So in particular, the will show up only where it touches a E. So where you have li or il or something, it'll be a l still. But otherwise, historically, the l changed to a l. So, for example, the word for sky in other languages is langit. They pronounce as langit. And you could write that with an L, really, because it's still the same phoneme. It's just an allophone of the same sound. But because it sounds so different, people still chose to use a different symbol to represent that. So, you know, you have your linguistic ideals, but then you also have people's impression and, you know, just trends and, you know, people's liking. So it's not terribly difficult to just use an additional letter for that. And it might even help people to learn the language, so why not? All right. Let's move on here. Kapampangan, Joshua mentioned that Kapampangan has a conflict between two orthographies. A lot of languages really do. A lot of languages don't even have standard orthographies, like my own, for example, right? There's not a conflict of two different orthographies, but if you just look at messages between me and my sister, you will see that we both spell in very different ways. And it's not because one of us uses more slang than the other, but there's no standard. Everyone kind of writes different. A lot of languages have different standards. And so again, when you document your language, you want to ask yourself the question, which of the orthographies represents the sound system in a more consistent way? And then you want to go with that. Or if one sound system is really much more common, it's more in use, then you might want to go with that, but adapt it a little bit, you know, maybe tweak it a little bit, add some additional characters maybe, or some diacritics like accent marks or something to make the distinctions that matter in that language, right? Like, for example, vowel length. As I mentioned before, for Tagalog, same thing for Kapampangan. It makes a difference in meaning. So, for example, if you say pau or if you say pau, they mean two different things, right? Joshua, maybe you can let the rest of the people here on Facebook know what two different words mean. All right. Yes? Too many questions? Oh, the new questions. Okay, I'm gonna. Leah told me to move to the end of the to the questions here. All right, I'm gonna go back now again. Is that a good idea? Start from the most recent one and then go back. Is that okay? Good. All right. So Rahu is Dravidian. I mean, yes. So there are various reasons why people use one orthography or another one. Religion often plays a role. You know, some people want to write as it is, as their language is written in the Bible, or some people will use different orthographies depending on whether they're Muslims or whether they're Christians. That's a common thing, you know. So as linguists, we try not to get tangled up in politics too much, but oftentimes you can't really avoid it. Yes, so here's a comment by Miho that he has the impression that native speakers often don't notice the difference between allophones. That's very true, and the reason for that is it doesn't matter in that language. It doesn't. In English, if you say spit or if you say pit, you don't even realize that you make two different sounds. Really, you don't think about it, right? And if I were to say spit, it would maybe sound a little bit funny, but you know, it still means the same thing. So there's no reason for people to really pay attention to that difference. Therefore, they don't. Okay. You guys, Leah and Liv, let me know if you have any comments that I should really address. And I'm just gonna keep reading here. I won't be able to answer all of them, but I'll get back to you later if I skipped your question. I'm just gonna choose and pick some of them here.
Social community issues that can impact orthographic standardization?
Is that the whole question? Yeah, like I said, politics often plays a role in there. Oftentimes also, people just want to, you know, there's a national language already written, for example, and then maybe you speak a minority language that may be related to that language, or maybe more or less similar in its sound system to that language. But because people are already familiar with the national language and how it's written, they just automatically pick that writing system to represent that language. And that might work if the languages are very similar in structure. But I know some examples of where it's really a terrible choice. For example, and well, maybe I shouldn't be so judging here because, like I said, I might get myself into trouble. But in the case of Japanese, for example, maybe some of you are aware that in the northernmost part of Japan, there's an indigenous language called Ainu, and that language is not related to Japanese as far as we know, and also it's very different in its sound system, especially in its syllable structure to Japanese. But people still use the hiragana or the katakana, one of them, to represent that language, and it's very confusing because it has final consonants at the end of syllables. It has what we call closed syllables, and hiragana is not made to represent that. So it ends up being really difficult to use those writing systems to represent that language. But people, you know, got into that habit just because of political reasons, really, because, you know, Japanese is the national language and it uses that writing system. Also, Japanese uses the kanji, right? Kanji are really just literally, if you look at what kanji means, it means Chinese characters. And so, you know, they started using those characters because of economic ties with China. So yes, both language and writing systems are very much representative and reflective of the history of a language community, as well as their social structure and various things. I hope that answered that question. Now, as I said, phonology is a huge topic. You know, you could really, to be able to understand the field of phonology, you would have to take at least one semester, you know, a one semester course to really get a good grasp of it. But I just gave you the basics here. So this shouldn't, you know, if you're curious about other things, feel free to ask any questions, post to this video or anytime on the Facebook group, and either I or other people will get back to you. There's a lot of linguists in our group. The mentors are experts, so someone will get back to you and answer your question. So really, if you're curious about anything, just share your ideas and you know, start the discussion. Are we gonna cover some more? Yeah, we're wrap it up. All right, I'm being told to wrap it up. Okay. Yes, like I said, we can go on forever. I'm gonna get back to some of the people who comment right here are actually my mentees. So I'm gonna keep that discussion going about a lot of them speak Philippine languages, and there's one person speaking Javanese. So I'm gonna look forward to discussing more with you guys, as well as all of you really who are watching now, or who are watching this, who will be watching this video later on. Thanks a lot for joining. Like I said, just keep the questions rolling and get the discussion going. Yes, thank you very much for joining. Mahalo. Ahuiho.